And we're continuing on our show, Spiritual States, very interesting topic. Habit becomes a second nature. By the way, we studied this not long ago on our daily lessons that are translated practically into all languages. And today, we are going to talk to a broader audience. So there's nothing stronger than habit. And it's practically impossible to change habits. It's very hard to change habits. We know it. Just like it's very hard to change your character from not that it's hard. We know that it is impossible to change man's character. And habit becomes a second nature. We know that man's nature, meaning we're talking about our own nature, our substance, is the will to receive that functions according to the program of maximum pleasure, minimum effort. Minimum energy. And since it is impossible to change man's character, it turns out that it's impossible to change habits either. Dr. Laitman, very hard to change habits. Very hard. For this, it's necessary. For this, you need very serious motivation that we really want to acquire some new acquired habits, actions, tastes. Really, habit becomes a second nature, meaning that which we receive from nature, it's only some foundations of our character. Everything else is formed under the influence of the environment. Host, we know that it is impossible to change man's nature. Dr. Laitman, yeah, but what will I aspire for? What will I like? What will I hate? This is all within the framework of our general ego, and this is how it's done. This is how we program. That's how we are programmed by our parents' attitude towards us, the environment's attitude towards us. Host, we know that habit it's directly related to pleasure or pain, meaning if we take a process like brushing your teeth, then you can develop this kind of habit in children. They don't like doing it, but if you give some kind of reward for their action, then a person gets used to doing it, and eventually, even if you don't give them that reward, the action itself will be the reward. And if a person doesn't brush his teeth, he'll feel suffering, pain. So the process that comes through pleasure and suffering, it is possible through it to develop habit in man? Yes. But still, it doesn't change our nature. Dr. Laitman, we can change our nature. We, within the boundaries of our nature, can simply express it in different styles, but that's it. Host, is it possible to become accustomed to performing different actions without reward? Dr. Laitman, nothing happens without reward. Nature and we, society, something has to awaken us to perform things one way or another. Host, so foolish habits, you can change them through suffering? Dr. Laitman, not necessarily through suffering. Any habits, doesn't matter foolish or not, it's all relative, but it's possible to change everything. It all depends only on the measure to which we really want to do it and how much we know how to do it. Host, in the article of Shamati, this is how it's called. Nature becomes a second nature. It says that when a person becomes accustomed to doing something, that becomes a habit. And any habit can become a second nature. Therefore, a person can feel his reality in anything. And thanks to his habit, he starts feeling things that he couldn't feel before. Pleasure and etc. Meaning, we could get accustomed to anything. We can feel anything. What does he actually mean here? Meaning that everything depends on the measure to which we train ourselves. We acquire a certain way of thinking, acting, behaving, reacting, etc., etc. And this way, we can reformat ourselves in a way that we will enjoy certain actions, objects, etc., etc. It all depends on how we program ourselves. There's nothing else in a person besides this kind of fulfillment. So can we say that the fulfillment that we get, if we look at the program, the program itself is education. It works under the influence of education. So is it possible to teach a person to relate to another the way I relate to myself, to care for others the way I care for myself? Dr. Laitman, it is not simple. It has to be accompanied by certain rewards, constant rewards for me to care for someone else, to feel that I gain from it. It is all related to certain actions. It's like teaching animals, taming animals. There's nothing special or unique about it. Just like I want to teach an animal, dog, cat, some domestic animal, doesn't matter which. It's simply easier because they're domesticated. We changed them over generations. We made them such that they became more flexible in relation to our demands toward them. And therefore, we can do it. And that's what we do. Host. So, if we say that in order to reveal the upper light or the upper force, that as a means, we need to correct our attitude toward another, toward the other person. So it says in the sources, or source texts. So I can feel light through becoming accustomed to feeling the other person. Dr. Laitman, well, this is very non-simple what you're saying. Host, that it's non-simple, it's clear, but is it possible? Dr. Laitman, yeah, it's no more than habit. Directed habit. Host, so the efforts that I make to feel the other person, to relate to him the way I relate to myself, and I can examine how I relate to myself, in order to feel this higher reality that the wisdom of Kabbalah talks about, it's all a matter of habit, that's it? Dr. Laitman, actually, it's a habit. Habit meaning what? A habit is the influence on yourself by making an effort, inner effort in that direction, and also an external one. Suppose some educator helps you. In any case, there is a certain general influence that is involved here of nature, of the so-called upper light, and it changes us in any case. No matter who we are in our actions and on whatever level that we are, we're not talking about some cosmic, spiritual levels and dimensions, but, even the ordinary corporeal changes that we perform under the influence of directed education, it draws a certain force from nature, and that force changes us and gives us another habit. But still, these habits that we talk about, we divide them into two levels. There's the corporeal level and the spiritual level. On the corporeal level, it's simply, we're talking about exchanging a certain habit for another. It's like changing one taste for another. For that, there are entire systems in society. There are many of them. They work. We see it. But also, there exist Kabbalistic systems. It's when we draw a special form of forces that exist in nature that change us into the opposite, meaning that where, as a result of a certain goal, we start awakening upon us such forces in nature that change us, actually change us, that make us inverse, opposite to our initial nature. Host. I'll try to decipher or commentate what I explained. So education is that we teach a child a certain thought. Suppose that you can't win alone. We communicate this to him, but only together, and this becomes habit. The same they do in the army, for example, when people are even willing to give their life for the love, to save the life of others, their team, etc. Meaning the collective is more important to you than your own life, and this is something that you can accustom a person to. Dr. Laitman, yeah, it's done psychologically. We see it. Host, it's kind of unnatural, and you're saying that still, this does not breach the boundaries of our nature, which is the will to receive, but it's simply exchanging priorities. Dr. Laitman, yes. Host, so it's possible to teach a person that the collective is more important than myself. Dr. Laitman, we see it on the example of people that work in such special teams, like in submarines, alpinists, people that all the time struggle with the question of surviving versus being dependent on the collective. And they feel in such a way toward each other that they don't want to stay alive if their friends die. Host, so the entire process of education is exchanging your egocentric worldview into an altruistic one without leaving the boundaries of our world. Dr. Laitman, yes, it's still in the boundaries of this world. Host, but it doesn't work. They tried doing it in school and other places. Dr. Laitman, no, they weren't doing it right. You can make such a creature out of human being that simply becomes like a zombie. Well, it's hard to call it a zombie, but that will see himself only in the service of his collective. But usually it works in small collectives, small teams, where a person associates his existence with the team, so much so that if the team dies, he does too. He can't remain without them. Host, yeah, there are such cases in closed societies. But let's not take such examples, extreme examples where you have to give up your life, but simply for people to be good, kind, to educate us, teach us like in school, ethics, morals, but it doesn't work. We see that it doesn't work, Dr. Laitman. No. Our social systems, schools, etc., they don't work because there's no support there. There's no support of society in them, and therefore to the measure to which society becomes more and more open, suppose China, it's a good example. It is a closed society. They lived by their own laws, very different from the rest of the world. They opened up, and that was that. They started drifting apart, and regardless of how much they tried to unite them one way or another, it can't hold for a long time together. And all the more there's so many and so diverse host. So we were taught to do the right things, to think about the right things, but there was no example for it. Dr. Laitman, you can't associate yourself with so many different, multifaceted people that you can't even grasp in your sensations. Where we're talking about millions. It's impossible, host. But eventually you're saying that there is such a pedagogical method where it is possible to educate a person in such a way that it will develop the right habits in him, that he will think about other people too. And you're saying that it does not go beyond the boundaries of our nature. What Kabbalah says is that in order to spiritually develop, spiritually meaning to change your intention, there too, from egoistic to altruistic, you have to change your nature. What's the difference? How to develop such a habit? Dr. Laitman, it's not habit. It's It's like a necessity in that a person sees how much his nature is evil. And only because of that does he consciously come to a state where he changes it. But he comes to this too egoistically at first. He sees that if he'll act for the better, he wants to find out about his life, about death, about the purpose of life, about how to acquire something greater in this life, to find out about the divine mechanism that corrects him, that governs him. He wishes to rise above everyone else. He wants to understand and feel himself as creating. And when he starts going deeper into it, he sees that he can attain all that to really be above the world, to really be greater, above everyone and everything, not with an evil purpose, but simply he wants to attain, perceive, create. Then he sees from what the wisdom of Kabbalah explains to him that this can be done only if he acquires new qualities. And new qualities, these are qualities of love, of bestowal, qualities that are above man's existence. And here he begins to understand that actually, probably it is impossible. And here there is a very serious period during which he has to force himself to advance, to rule over himself, to draw from nature, from his studies with nature, to draw this special energy from nature that will change him, that will raise him above his ego, and this way to build above himself, above his corporeal self, his spiritual self. Host. There's this very thin line between the habits that we talked about in the corporeal world, where a person simply changes his priorities, and that state that you're talking about, where a person really changes his nature consciously, where he sees the entire world and all people not through his egoistic prism, through only what's good for me, but through this kind of altruistic intention, and by that he attains the spiritual world. And actually both are a habit, and one drifts into the other, meaning, as we say, that a person comes from lo lishma to lishma, meaning from egoistic attainment of the Creator, that he wants to attain the Creator for himself, and to the point where this becomes a second nature, to see the world through his altruistic intention. Is this correct, Dr. Laitman? Yes, habit becomes second nature, and this is how he starts acting. Host. So a person can't go back to thinking egoistically after that. Dr. Laitman, no, I can't say that. There are different options here. But to be in one nature, then in another, and then fall into the first nature again, it's possible too. It all depends on the measure to which he will put himself under the upper force that holds him like a magnet holds a piece of the metal in the air. This piece of metal is kept in the air with the force of the magnet. It's the very same way a person can make it so that the upper force of nature, the positive force that gives anti-egoistic opportunities, options, possibilities for it to keep him above the ground, above our ego. Host. So just like the Creator does not think about himself, a person who acquires the second nature that already becomes a habit, his nature, then that person too has no further thoughts about himself. Dr. Laitman, to the measure to which he has received that force from the Creator. So obviously, as long as he's in this world, he has to care for his basic needs. Dr. Laitman, that goes without saying. Host, okay, that's clear. But when we say that the Creator has no thought about himself and a person acquires the same quality, what does that mean? Dr. Laitman, the Creator is the complete opposite nature to our egoistic one, and therefore his entire essence is directed toward bestowal. And since he has no will to receive, there's only the will to bestow in him, to give, and that's how he acts, works. Host, is there some kind of connection between habit and the influence of the environment over a person in his development? Dr. Laitman, influence over a person is a tremendous influence. Host, what works stronger, the environment or habit? Dr. Laitman, no, the environment is stronger. Host, stronger than habit? Dr. Laitman, yes, the environment can change man's habits because in a person there are many qualities that you can play with. Hate, love, shame, especially shame, envy, fame, etc., etc. There are many things, and the external influence can play on these qualities of ours so much so that a person can change. There is the ability to change man. Host, so the environment is like a means, meaning there are habits. To develop a habit means to make some kind of effort to perform a certain action that eventually will become a habit. And there is the environment, meaning I can perform these actions in the environment itself, but then it will help me to do it quicker. Dr. Laitman, under the influence of the environment, a person can do everything quickly and correctly. So the environment is like it speeds things up. Now, there is reading the book of Zohar, there are other things. When a person, he gets used to reading certain texts, praying, this develops him too. Dr. Laitman, yes, if this is something that he does regularly, then the book of Zohar or any other correct sources start influencing him in such a way that we see how a person changes. This is actually the essence. Where else can we take the upper influence, the upper energy that influences us from? We have to draw it upon ourselves. And it appears as a result of studying, reading, and especially being in special spheres and being organized in special small teams, what we call tens, small groups, that can organize for a person such an environment, such a surrounding that where he simply falls under their influence and he's willing, or even if he's not that willing, but still, this is what they make out of him. They change him. So you recommend such 2-3 times a day to read source texts in order for it to become man's habit. Dr. Laitman, yeah, but that's not it. You're reading source texts, but when it's not you and the source texts, but you and your environment, the human environment, not the still, the vegetative, the animate, but the human environment, and the human environment is special. These are special people, a special group that are around you, demonstrate the right relations, demanding the right relations from you. Then what happens is that you actually draw yourselves to the spiritual degree. Host, There are such methods where from childhood a person's taught to pray, to read Psalms, and he reads it automatically. And he's told that for this you'll have some kind of pleasure in this world, the next you'll have health, you'll have this, you'll have that. And if not to teach this to a person from childhood, he starts asking questions. What am I reading this for? Because he doesn't feel pleasure in all of these texts. He doesn't understand. So how to develop habit here? Or is the habit in the effort that to exert this effort is the habit? Dr. Laitman, it's all relative. It all depends on the environment, in short. The main thing is to create the correct environment for any person, for all people, for any environment, for any nation, for any whatever, so that any willing person would like to somehow find such an environment for himself in which he will correctly develop. Host, last question. What habit would you advise a person to acquire in life that would help him in his spiritual development? Dr. Laitman, to understand that all of us are in one system, that we depend on each other, and that even if we don't feel it, don't see it, still to envision to ourselves that we completely depend on one another. Meaning, in essence, habit, when we will feel our dependence on one another, will really help each of us. Host, so actually a person has to, Dr. Laitman, to build this picture for himself that I'm dependent on everyone and everyone's dependent on me, and therefore there's no point in thinking poorly about anyone or trying to detach from them, but to understand that with all of my efforts I try and would like for all people to understand our mutual connection. Host, what does a person need this kind of habit for, Dr. Laitman? Then he'll act correctly towards himself and others. He won't make mistakes in the world, because this way, when Providence, the upper force of nature, we learn how to act correctly with it and don't make mistakes. And were we to try to keep this global integral picture in mind, then it would be easier. Host, but since these are tremendous efforts, then you have to receive some kind of tremendous pleasure by doing it. What kind of pleasure is it, host? Dr. Laitman, the fact that it's the truth, and it is the truth, only that our ego doesn't allow us to do it, it already means a lot. We wouldn't have ruined nature, society, each other. We wouldn't have developed means of mass destruction. We could have had a fabulous life on this planet were we to simply correctly depict what is going on with us. Host, so again, in a sentence, habit is, Dr. Laitman, the right habit can lead us to a magnificent existence. Host, which is what? Dr. Laitman. It is such that we can imagine ourselves as existing in a mutual system of complete interconnection. So to become accustomed to being interconnected with other people, Dr. Laitman, completely interconnected with all other people in the world, and I will be allowed to think, and I will think about us and not myself. Thank you very much. Let's hope that this will become our second nature. All the best.